When former NFL linebacker Darren Lee claimed he had no idea what happened to 29-year-old Gabriella, investigators turned to an unlikely witness: his own digital searches. Prosecutors say a chilling ChatGPT query tells a very different story. In this gripping episode of Criminal Motives, we dissect the raw body cam footage and the case that shook the sports world. I'm Matthew Pfeiffer, a therapist who explores the behaviors behind high-profile true crime cases. So be sure to like, share, subscribe, and let's get this episode started. I just want to give a real quick trigger warning. We're going to be talking about themes of domestic violence, and some of the details get very graphic. We take domestic violence very seriously on this channel. And if you're someone who is struggling in one of those type of relationships, or if you're still recovering from one of those type of relationships, this is the reason why I partnered with BetterHelp. If you go into the links in the description box down below, you can connect with a licensed therapist from the comfort and convenience of your home. You can even connect with them on your lunch break. And one of the best parts about it is that when you use the links in my bio, you'll get 15% off your first month of therapy. They not only have individual sessions, they also have couple sessions, and they also work with teens. So if you are struggling or recovering from a domestic violence situation, just remember that you're not alone. So be sure to connect with a licensed therapist today.
Darren Lee, in the first round of the 2016 NFL draft, he signed a deal that was for 4 years, and it was worth roughly $10 million. But this is Lee now. After one of his recent court appearances, this video per WBNS television, he's shackled, he's in a jail jumpsuit, and he is currently being held without bond. Lee is accused of killing his fiancée on February 5th inside their home near Chattanooga, Tennessee. Her name was Gabriella Perpetuo. She was just 29 years old. Her obituary shows pictures of her working as a nurse and spending time with family and friends. Her family has filed a civil wrongful death lawsuit against Lee, seeking $50 million. And that lawsuit is shedding some light on what they believe happened inside the home where she lost her life. Now, before we talk about that lawsuit, I need to break down what we just learned about what Lee reportedly said to law enforcement on that day in February that they responded to his home.
CPR in progress. Snow Conway. Snow Conway, Snowy Owl. I'm a 29-year-old female.
This is a picture of the body cam footage that was played at Lee's preliminary hearing in Hamilton County, Tennessee, per WTVC television. Now, you can see in this picture, Lee is speaking to a first responder, still wearing some NFL gear on his front patio. Now, Lee was the one who called 911, and he told law enforcement he had no idea what happened to Gabriella. Prosecutors played roughly 10 minutes of the body cam video in court. And according to WTVC, Lee is heard on that body camera saying, quote, "She wasn't saying anything. And that's when I called 911 immediately. And I was like, what's going on?" But then prosecutors unveiled what they say are dozens of messages that Lee had sent to ChatGPT. And they argue those messages are proof that he knew exactly what happened to Gabriella and that he is allegedly the one who did it. Now, before we get to the ChatGPT part of this, we need to talk about the fall from grace that Darren Lee has had. Frankly, saying fall from grace, it's an understatement considering everything that this guy had going for him for most of his life. Lee was a standout college athlete, played linebacker at Ohio State, and in 2015, he was the defensive MVP of the Sugar Bowl when the Buckeyes beat Alabama. He had 7 tackles in that game, 3 for a loss, and 2 sacks. Now, even if you don't know football, those are monster numbers. And that game, it's one of the great games the Buckeyes have played in the last 20 years because they went on to win the national championship that year. And then in the spring, Lee cashed in big time financially because he signed a contract for more money than most people see in a lifetime. He was the 20th overall pick in the NFL draft by the New York Jets. So Lee goes and plays in the biggest media market. He's a millionaire, but the pros did not go as well as his college career did. He only lasted a couple of years in New York. Some might label him a bust. He did bounce around for a few more years, including a stint with the Chiefs in 2019, where he actually won a Super Bowl. He also played for the Raiders and the Bills. Now, even though he didn't go on to have a Hall of Fame NFL career, let's be honest, from a financial standpoint, he should be in a good place. He made more than $10 million. His last season, though, was in 2021, and attorneys for Gabriella's family have reportedly said that Lee hasn't worked for the past 5 years. Now, even though he may have been comfortable from a financial standpoint, Lee is also someone who has had issues with the law and issues with domestic violence long before this.
So before we get into this next phase of this video, one of the things that I want to bring out, one of the concerning things, and especially for someone who, as a therapist and as a coach, has worked with thousands of people who have experienced abuse at the hands of spouses, significant others, and partners, whether it be more emotional abuse or physical and domestic violence. And also people, and I've also worked with thousands of people with dating and relationships. And some of the things that I see and some of the images and some of the conversations that I hear specifically on social media is that on the surface with someone like Darren, he sounds like the type of person that is sought after, the type of man that is sought after, very rich, very wealthy, an NFL player, right? On the surface, someone that in this type and this prototype of person is typically on a pedestal of a lot of different types of women. Now, one of the things that I warn a lot of people who I work with, whether it is male or female that I'm working with, is that it's important that you don't pedestalize a type. You hear people talking about their types all the time. You don't really actually have a type. You know, I might have some things that you like and some things that you're looking for. But this is one of the reasons why, because what you're about to hear is a very contrasting version of who he is, right? So on the surface, and I'm sure when Gabriella met him, these are some of the things that she said. You know, he's in the NFL, he's rich, he's wealthy. I'm sure even her friends were mentioning it, right? And this is where a lot of concern comes in, is that oftentimes when people attach themselves to someone who has a platform, who has a lot of money, who has a lot of power or a lot of wealth, a lot of times people allow for some of the other not only red flags, but things that are actually dangerous. They let them slide, right? I've worked with people who I remember there was a woman who I was working with one time, and she pedestalized tall men, right? And we were having a conversation, and we were talking about the situation, and you know, I was encouraging her to end this relationship and to move forward. And she was like, "Yeah, but he's 6'4", and." Right. And guys do this too. Yeah, but she's a baddie. Yeah, but she's this. It doesn't make sense. Right. And some of the other things that you're about to hear here in a second are very contrasting to the image of what someone who might be wealthy, who lives a New York lifestyle, who's won a Super Bowl, all the things that would potentially make a great partner. You're going to hear some very contrasting things that really not only should have been a red flag, but absolutely should have been a stopping point.
This murder case. For example, in 2023, he was arrested in Franklin County, Ohio on a charge of domestic violence knowingly causing physical harm. He eventually pleaded guilty to an assault charge in that case, and a no contact order was issued. And in that case, according to local media reports, Lee was accused of punching a woman in the face multiple times. Now, at this most recent hearing this week in Tennessee, where he is facing this murder charge, prosecutors reportedly said that Lee is actually on probation as we speak, related to a case out of Florida where he was charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. So now you know a little bit more about him. You can see he is someone who certainly had every opportunity, but at the same time has a troubled past when it comes to domestic violence in the legal system. With all that said, let's go to February 5th and what prosecutors say happened to get.
So one of the things here is this is something that really should have been on, and maybe it was. Obviously she's not here with us to be able to talk about it, unfortunately. But I'm mentioning this specifically for people who might be watching and might be listening to this. And now whenever I say this on social media, people come after me. But these are some of the reasons why. Before you get too wrapped up in someone, this person, Gabriella, unfortunately was engaged to this man. You need to get their background check, right? You need to get a background check. You need to get an STD check, right? And you also need to get know their financials as well, right? So you need to know those three before you get way too wrapped up in people. And people like, oh, well, what about the romance? And what about this? What about the fact that they're 6'4" and the NFL? Well, the problem is that even people who are wealthy or have money can be A, problematic, B, abusive, C, in a situation like this, allegedly a killer, but at the very least, someone who has a very strenuous background, right? A very tumultuous background when it comes to domestic violence. And it gets to and we have to separate our emotions for someone, and we have to separate that pedestal I was just talking about, and really bring some practicality behind it, right? And understand that some things just aren't worth the risk. I don't care how much money someone has, how wealthy someone is, how much power, how much status someone is, how we might even think that might impact us. And one of the things that we have to be very careful about in these type of situations is that when we do have someone on a pedestal, it's very easy for them to convince someone that those problems in the past are A, in the past, or B, just aren't their fault. And when you have overwhelming emotion for that person, you can allow for things that you really shouldn't allow slide, right? This is a man that she shouldn't have even dated, let alone being engaged and married to, or I'm not sure if they were living together. It sounds like they were living together. But this is someone that this is someone that this problem should have been nipped in the bud right from the beginning, as early as, and that's one of the things I tell people that I work with, is that one of the best ways to deal with manipulative, abusive type of people is to exit as soon as we possibly can.
Gabriella inside this home in Hamilton County, Tennessee. Now, when law enforcement arrived, it was around 1:30 in the afternoon. Law enforcement say that they spoke with Lee, and he told them, reportedly, he had no idea what happened to Gabriella, even though she had some very significant injuries that we're going to talk about in just a moment. And it's also important to note that he said that he called 911 immediately. Prosecutors later say that he did shed some light on what potentially happened to Gabriella, claiming that she fell through a glass shower door. But police say that Lee also sent those messages to ChatGPT a full day before law enforcement were even called. And that could be incredibly damning for Lee as this case plays out. Now, prosecutors say, according to WTVC television, that there was blood in multiple rooms of this house. Now, these are pictures of the crime scene shown in court. In the blue you see there is where law enforcement say blood was found on the floor, on the walls. Court documents show that Gabriella had multiple stab wounds and bruising on her head and her eyes. Blood was found on the toilet in several rooms. Blood was found in Lee's BMW. Blood was found in the kitchen, allegedly. So let's get to these ChatGPT messages, because you can see here, just based off of the forensic evidence that prosecutors say they have, Lee's story of allegedly falling through a glass shower door, that doesn't seem to add up at this point. And then there's what he did the day before on ChatGPT that the prosecution presented this week. Now,
before we get into the ChatGPT, so he one of the things he did, he asked ChatGPT some questions beforehand. So one of the reasons why I want to bring this up is that the domestic violent type oftentimes plan out. A lot of times people ask, like, well, do they know what they're doing? And they will oftentimes try to convince you that it's that you're the reason why they did the things that they did, right? That your behavior did this, your spending did this, you talking to that guy, you talking to that girl caused me to do this. This was already planned before he did the things that he did, right? He knew what he was going to do, even though likely, and we'll never know what he said to her in those moments. But as someone who's worked with these victims for a long period of time, he likely told her that it was her fault and that she, quote, deserved what she was getting, right? Because she, quote, pushed him to this. These are very common themes when we're talking about domestic violence perpetrators. The other thing that I want to bring out is that they're talking about blood in his car. It's all throughout the house. And this is something that could have happened over the course of several hours. It's also something that could have happened over the course of several days. And you're going to hear some things in terms of the timeline, in terms of the ChatGPT, that kind of alludes to that at the very least that this what happened over the course of several hours. Whether he bound her, this scenario up until her passing sounds like it was very, very significant, and not only obviously very traumatizing, but something that likely lasted for quite some time. So I feel terrible for her, and I feel terrible for the family as well in the situation.
Prosecutors argue that Lee used the chatbot as a legal advisor to allegedly cover up a crime scene and to know what to say to law enforcement. One of those messages reportedly read, quote, "Don't know what to do right now. Fiancée did her crazy thing again, and now she's messed up. I wake up and she has 2 swollen eyes. I didn't do anything, self-inflicted. She stabbed herself, slit her eye, IDK, but she isn't waking up or responding. What do I do?" Now, even though as you read that, Lee is trying to argue that Gabriella did these injuries to herself, it's important to remember that he sent this, according to prosecutors, a full day before he called 911. Now, prosecutors say that ChatGPT actually responded by reportedly saying, quote, "Here's what to say without framing it as police trouble." Now, Lee is facing a charge of first-degree murder. He is being held without bond in Tennessee. Gabriella's family filed a $50 million wrongful death lawsuit against Lee, and that suit reads that Gabriella sustained, quote, "severe bodily injuries, including but not limited to blunt force trauma to the head, resulting in severe brain injury, a fractured cervical spine/neck, multiple puncture and stab wound to the chest, abdomen, and leg, extensive abrasions and bruising to the left side of her face, and human bite marks found on the descendant's body consistent with a violent physical struggle and intentional assault." The judge, after this probable cause hearing, found that there is probable cause for this case to move forward, and it is now reportedly headed to a grand jury. Joining us now to talk more about this case and where it could go from here is Rich Schoenstein, trial attorney. Thank you, as always, for being with us here on Law and Crime. ChatGPT is a new tool for a lot of people. I know we often talk about text messages in cases like this, but you're actually seeing, according to prosecutors, a defendant having reached out to ChatGPT asking what to do in this situation. What did you make of that development in this case?
Well, it's interesting. We've seen now for a number of years critical evidence in electronic form. And in a lot of these cases, we hear about text messaging, we hear about emails, and we hear about internet searches, because we have cases where suspects, searched on the internet how to clean up after a dead body, right? Or something like that. And so this to me is just that, but with the new technology. He didn't allegedly do an internet search. He allegedly asked ChatGPT a question.
And you look at it too, and it's, what he searched, from what we understand, it's not where he admitted guilt, but then similarly to text messages and some of the other data you can get from a phone or a computer, he was asking these questions a day before he calls 911. When you look at how strong the evidence may be against him in this case, just that fact alone, even if he's not, it's not the forensic evidence part of it, but just there's clearly something amiss with the timeline he was giving law enforcement and what ChatGPT is saying. What do you make of that part of it as prosecutors are building their case against Darren Lee?
Well, I think it's very helpful for the prosecution. It first of all, it contradicts directly the story that he told the authorities when they came. It shakes up the timeline, and it contradicts what he told law enforcement. So that's a problem. And it shows planning, and it shows potential consciousness of guilt. It is very damning evidence, is what it is. The rest of the evidence has to come in. Prosecutors have to present their entire case. But asking AI questions about this is a bad look for sure.
Without a doubt. And this is not his first run-in with the legal system. He was facing domestic violence charges in Ohio in 2023. Prosecutors say that he was still on probation for another assault case out of Florida. He had an incident in New York in 2017 when he was on the Jets. So this is someone who has faced allegations and also has pleaded guilty to domestic violence in the past. How much of that could be brought in if this goes to trial? As if prosecutors want to paint him as someone who has been violent in the past, there is evidence on the record. And he is pleaded guilty to it. Of a
classic battle of prior bad acts where the prosecutors want to put in similar conduct or related conduct that allegedly happened previously, and the defense will argue that that's not admissible because it's very prejudicial at trial and it's not probative of the question of whether he killed this particular person on this particular date. None of those other incidents were him killing somebody. It doesn't go to showing an MO. It's merely intended to show that he had violent tendencies, which I think the defense will contend is not a sufficient reason to put it into evidence. So we're going to have to get into more details about what exactly those acts were, what the circumstances were, what the status of any allegations were in those situations. But that's going to be a pretrial evidentiary battle if this case goes to trial.
You talk about some of the battle with the evidence. I mean, on the chat.
So I really hope that they allow for it. And I actually think they make it, and they need to make it mandatory that in situations like this with domestic violence, that pre-domestic violent acts are a part of the trial. The reason why I'm so adamant about that is that we don't know the details of some of the prior acts, but one of the things I can promise you, just from my experience, is that they progressively got worse. Now, some of these acts, not only likely did they progressively get worse, but depending on if it was the same person or not, they could have gotten progressively worse even with that same person. So obviously this one was the most egregious because the person allegedly, right? I got to say allegedly because he still is owed due process and those sorts of things. But if you look at his, I don't have privy to it. If we do, then I'll make sure I give an update on this trial. But if we ever get what he did in the beginning of A, the relationship, but also B, in other domestic violent acts, I don't want to make light of anything because all domestic violence is terrible, but it's probably much lighter than what he did to Gabriella, right? It's also probably much lighter than what he did most recently before Gabriella. You're likely going to see like an escalation where you're going to see also if we get testimony from Gabriella's friends and family, likely going to see and hear an escalation escalation with the relationship with Gabriella as well. And so it's important, and it's relevant to see that this person is not only not getting better, not learning a lesson, right? A lot of times people think that they can learn a lesson, when in reality, this person is getting much, much worse. And there's no end in sight. And if we let this person off in this situation, then it's probably going to end up happening again.
GPT front of it, that seems like if a jury hears that and they read the messages that were shown in this probable cause hearing, that could be, very, very bad for Darren Lee and his defense. What can a defense attorney do with something like ChatGPT to try to get that excluded in a way that we do see sometimes? Maybe it's a text message, maybe it's an internet search that a defense attorney tries to get out of the way. How difficult is it to actually get that thrown out in cases like this?
I don't really see a path to getting that evidence thrown out. That is the defendant's communication about the circumstances of this person's death on a computer. I don't think that evidence is coming out. It's not privileged. It's not protected in any way that I can think about, as long as they can establish, I guess they have to establish authenticity. They have to prove that they've pulled this off of a computer and it really is him, and they can show that it really was him. That would be the challenge. But if they can get over that hurdle with a computer expert, which I assume they can, then I don't see any way to keep that evidence out.
Look at
even if they did keep this evidence out, in this part, I'm not an attorney, but just from being a part of court and these type of circumstances, there's more than likely still plenty of digital evidence that they can use. So even if they were to throw out, let's say, the ChatGPT log, there's more than likely going to be plenty of email. There's probably going to be plenty of text messages. There's probably going to be plenty of DMs. People that like this person, like Darren, a lot of times people talk about how convincing people who do domestic violence are. They're convincing for the person that's involved with them, but from the outside looking in, things are very clear as day. Right. It's very difficult when someone is trauma bonded to that person to be able to see through and see how this person might be abusing them. But when we're talking about, like, from the outside looking in, and if they start to use and peel back some of the text messages and some of the emails, and I'm sure if she tried to leave him before, there's probably a plethora of times where he called her multiple times, probably called and stalked her friends and family, those sorts of things as well. There's more than likely plenty of evidence, A, but also B, more than likely we're going to see where this evidence is going to be overwhelming. I don't think that is going to be close. So even if they don't allow ChatGPT in as evidence, they're likely going to have plenty of other stuff.
Darren Lee, he played linebacker. That can be like a car crash, whether it's college or the pros, multiple times a game, over and over. The public is well aware of what CTE is. I don't think that's been brought in at this point, but I could see the defense maybe bringing that argument up if they can prove it. I mean, to present a medical condition, if the evidence is that damning and that's maybe not a whodunit type case, I guess what's the path forward if they believe that that's something that can be presented, that they would have to go through, that a jury could actually hear that?
Well, you're talking now about like an insanity defense, and state laws vary on that. But to sort of cut to the core of it, the insanity defense is that they have a mental defect that precludes them from knowing really right from wrong, or for knowing that the actions they were taking were wrongful. My understanding is, I guess CBT could lead to that in certain circumstances, but again, you would need very good expert testimony to get to that stage to be able to make a proffer evidentiary of that the court would allow you to put that defense in front of the jury. I haven't heard that they're going to do that. I think so far the defense is not conceding that he is the person that did this crime or that it was a crime. Right? His story is that she somehow inflicted it herself or this just happened. So you have to get over that hump and then have the defense say, we're going to put on this insanity defense. And then I don't know if they would have enough to support that in this case.
And I do know that
it would be really difficult to support for them to argue insanity when you have things like the ChatGPT log. Because if someone doesn't know right from wrong, then why are they trying to cover it up? Right? Why are they trying to come up with a story? Why are they lying about it? Right? That is someone who doesn't know right from wrong. Like, they wouldn't behave as a person who has done wrong, if that makes sense. They would just act as though they just didn't act, right? And that maybe it's not a big deal, or but I don't see. I agree that I don't see this. I don't see that they even have an argument of any type of insanity plea.
CTE, you can't really prove someone has it until they've passed away and their brain can be examined. When it comes to just him as a figure, this is someone who had every opportunity in the world. I think the public could look and see he was, his first contract was 4 years for $10 million. That's more money than most people see in a lifetime. In some of these cases, when there is strong evidence facing a defendant, how much does the story of the person and maybe even building up some sort of sympathetic figure in a defendant actually matter when it comes to murder cases like this?
Well, I think if you're on the defense, you want to do some of that if this case goes to trial, because he's a professional football player. So the assumption by the jury is going to be that he has violent tendencies, because football is a game of violence. Right? I don't mean that disparagingly. I watch football. Sometimes I sort of grit my teeth and say, should I really be watching this? But I do, right? It is a game of violence, and the people who play it, and he played linebacker, that is somebody who hits people for a living violently and tries to put them to the ground. So telling a more complicated story about his background, his upbringing, trying to establish his person would be a good move by the defense to try to bolster his case.
And of course, he is just accused of this terrible murder. The defense has not given up that he is the one who did this. As we were saying, his side of the story is that he woke up, he doesn't really know what happened, and she was just in this condition. On the other hand, you have the prosecution. They have not said whether or not they're going to go for the death penalty in this case, but Tennessee is a death penalty state. Like, at this point, long away from a potential trial, what type of jockeying is happening behind the scenes between the defense and the prosecution, where I could see the prosecution, they certainly have leverage of saying, well, the death penalty is a card that they have. But then at the same end, you have the defense still arguing potentially that he's not the person who did this.
Yeah, I would gather there would have to be some kind of negotiation, like a case where the prosecution might take death off the table if they can get a guilty plea. It is a sort of in the crime of passion category, although there's an argument that he has violent tendencies, but this is not, it's hard to get to the death penalty in a single victim case like this, especially when the defendant knows the victim. I mean, there are still people on juries in this country who really don't think it's a crime to hit your wife. I mean, that's just, unfortunately, I think, a fact that you have to consider when you're prosecuting these cases. So I would think they would have some sort of negotiation about it. But if he is claiming, if he is glued to this argument that he's not the guy, that he didn't do it at all, I don't know how far that negotiation gets.
So I want to talk about this. This is something that I've actually wanted to talk about for a long time, because a lot of times people who don't follow true crime, don't follow any court news or reporting or anything like that, they get really upset when verdicts like this come out and they find out that someone has killed someone and they didn't get life, they didn't get the death penalty, something along those lines, and the charges seem like they are less than what the person deserves. And this comes after there was some sort of plea deal that was on the table and the person pleaded guilty and then they received lesser charges. There's a lot of reasons why they do that. So now, and I'm not talking about specifically for the perpetrator. Obviously, is doing it to get a better deal, but there's also a lot of benefits for everyone else involved, including the victim's family, to not re-traumatize. A lot of people forget how traumatizing court is for a lot of people, right? And so to bring people in to bring witnesses, now witnesses suddenly sometimes are afraid of this person or afraid of what this person can do, afraid of their friends and family retaliating, those sorts of things. And that's something that people really need to consider. So it saves a lot of people's lives and dignity. It saves them from being re-traumatizing, of looking at some of these pictures and some of these images of a loved one and their blood being splattered all over the place. It also saves, I think that people forget when people are in court, especially in a case like this, how defense attorneys will begin to question that person, the witness's credibility. Well, you used to do drugs and you used to do this and you used to, you were the one that told the victim to stay with Darren. And so these type of things start to come out, and it causes a lot of commotion, causes a lot of chaos in people's lives. And not only that, but there's also a lot of risk involved. Just like that person was, just like the expert was mentioning, talking about how there are, statistically speaking, there are jurors out there who believe that there's nothing wrong with someone's wife getting beat. As strange as that sounds, you have to be aware that there are people out there that would be perfectly okay with someone getting beat, with someone doing violent acts, with someone who might have ulterior motives, and the risk of someone like this convincing a jury, or there being several people like this in a jury, who allow for someone like Darren, assuming that he's guilty, to get off. Would not be the first time, right? So that there's been overwhelming evidence that someone is guilty of something, and all of a sudden, the jury thinks that they're innocent because of something, some weird thing, right? And so it alleviates everyone of those type of things, right? Saves a lot. It obviously saves a lot of time. Don't want to get in. I mean, we can talk about that part of it all day, but there's a lot of benefits to offering them some sort of plea deal, even if that person is very guilty, even if that person is very, very egregious in the act that they've done.
Comes to the civil side of this, Gabriella Perpetuo's family, they have filed a $50 million wrongful death lawsuit. I don't know what Darren Lee's financial situation is. He hasn't played in 5 years. Certainly made a lot of money in the pros. In these types of cases where the criminal side of it hasn't played out yet, how do you, as an attorney, kind of quantify what the wrongful death number is that a family is going for in cases like this?
Well, I'm not surprised to see a $50 million number on it. It's the death of a young person, arguably violently, and obviously you have a potentially wealthy defendant, and I don't know any better than you do about what his wealth is. My understanding is,
statistically speaking, NFL players are broke after 4 years after they're done playing. So statistically speaking, Darren likely doesn't have any money. Certainly not $50 million for any type of lawsuit of this nature. Most NFL players, 4 years after they've retired, people would be surprised. People don't believe that it's possible to make millions during a playing career and live paycheck to paycheck, but a lot of NFL players do. Not saying that's the case with Darren. He could be a terrible person and still very good with money, those sorts of things, and had a financial advisor. We see people like that all the time. But the reality of it is that he may not have anything. And statistically speaking, I think the last statistics that I saw were 70% of NFL players are broke 4 years after their playing career is done. And he's been done for, I think they said, for 5 years at this point. Hasn't collected an NFL check. I don't know if and they said that he hasn't done anything, hasn't worked or anything like that. Now he, could have done well with his finances to be able to not do anything for the last 5 years, but he may not be doing anything with it.
These football players have a long line of people who are getting paid out of their salary over the years. And my understanding is some of them don't do a very good job of keeping the money, and some of them do an excellent job of keeping the money, and that the league has done better over the years about educating their players to keep the money. So I don't know if he has money or not. If it's an intentional, if he murdered her, there's no insurance, right? There's no insurance that would cover that. There's nobody else. I don't really see any path to having a lawsuit against the league or a lawsuit against the team. You would sometimes consider that if you had a violent act committed by a current player, but he's a retired player. So they're going to put a high tag on it, and the case will be frozen for the most part while the criminal case plays out, because he doesn't have to testify in the civil case while he has criminal charges pending against him. He has a Fifth Amendment right. And usually what happens is the civil cases wait, they get filed, and they just wait until the criminal case is done. So there's a lot of questions there. The first one being, what kind of money is he actually worth? And then you can kind of figure out what would that settlement negotiation look like.
And then, very brief stint in the pros. And it's just, in some of these cases, it's not the first time that we've seen player who seem to have the entire world in the palm of their hand, the opportunity to not have to worry about money ever again. And then they're accused in these horrific crimes. Just what stands out to you in cases like this? Just kind of the humanity of it all, that someone loses their life, but then you have a defendant that typically doesn't fit the profile of what we typically see in murder cases, of someone who comes from money, someone who has all this opportunity and seems allegedly to have thrown it all away.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we have plenty of murder cases where there are defendants who you can't understand why they would put themselves in their position. I mean, Alec Murdaugh, right? That's a big murder case. That guy's not a football player, but he was a very wealthy, successful lawyer. He's accused of killing his wife and son. Nick Reiner, I understand there may be mental illness issues there, but that's someone who seemingly would have had every opportunity. So this plays out over and over and over again. And I know we see a lot of violence out of football players. And I don't know, because I've never sat down to do the math as to whether that's statistically disproportionate or we're just highlighting those cases because they're famous cases. But the bottom line is, murder and other crimes are committed often by people you cannot understand why they would do that. And if Darren Lee did what he's accused of doing, I don't understand how any person under any circumstances could have done that. It's beyond comprehension, and it's a question for a jury.
And we'll see how it plays out. Another case I think of course, Aaron Hernandez, and how that played out, in the NFL. as well. Just a very, very sad case. This woman, 29 years old, losing her life. Darren Lee being held without bond. We'll see what happens next. Rich Jones.
That's all I got for you today. Thank you very much for watching. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, hit the bell notification so you're notified each and every time I upload a new video. If you enjoy this type of content, be sure to check out my playlist where I have other videos that are very similar. That being said, I'll see you in the next episode. You guys have a good one.